All right, so Andrew Tate has ostensibly been on the back foot in regards to, of course, being in jail, roach infested, and now we're seeing a lot of his Muslims counterparts also getting their limbs blown apart by Zionists. You have this war going on, Israel, Palestine. Okay, so now Ben Shapiro's taking pot shots at Andrew while he's pretty much looking pretty down bad. And so now we got to say, okay, well, they're roasting each other to death. So what's going on exactly? Let's break it down.
Assure you, as someone who's not pimped women and bragged about it, the morality requires that those who rape women and kidnap women must be eradicated, not negotiated with. He says on my show, I won't be lectured on morality and toughness like Andrew Tate. His great idea of toughness and morality is pimping women and bragging about it on air, and then trying to quasi-walk it back while simultaneously maintaining many of the same positions and flexing his biceps. Listen, everyone should be able to tweet whatever it is they want. I'm all for an open discourse, even with people who I think are dead wrong on a lot of issues. But Andrew Tate is dead wrong on a lot of these issues. And the particularly ridiculous posturing about being yes, you're very tough when you want people to make peace with terrorists who've just murdered their children, very, very tough. What do you say to that?
So Ben is a warmonger. Ben has been wrong on basically every single issue you can name. He was with you with the vaccine and every other war. Ben is always calling for other people's young men to go and die in some war. He seems to love it. I don't know if he has short man syndrome, but he's always behind his desk calling about how important it is that big, strong men like me go and die.
Now, actually, that's a banger line because when you think about it, that is true, right? So you have Ben Shapiro, who's one of these guys who are 5'9" in their cowboy boots, and he's this metropolitan Jew from LA or something, but he's going to be wearing cowboy boots in Nashville now that he's relocated. Okay, great. So he's this transplant. And now, again, he has this Napoleonic structure to his own psychology to where he's a warmonger. He wants people to fight on the behalf of Israel, fight on the behalf of the American industrial military complex, of course. But instead, we're also having opposing points of views getting blackballed, such as the Andrew Tate perspective, which is obviously deferential to the Islamic partition of Palestine, where in a major way, we are looking at an amalgam of centuries, years long, dissonant ideas promulgated through the fighting of a land strip smaller than that of New Jersey. And we're again kind of facing a reality to which people like Piers Morgan, who's in England, who ought to not have a strong opinion over Israel. Personally, I could give a shit less. And so with that being said, you have people like Pierce on the payroll of these these people that are bankrolling ostensibly one side of the argument of this war. And you have Ben Shapiro, who is part of the tribe in which are benefiting the most from the Piers Morgan dialectic. And you have these sort of people vying for the popular narrative. And that popular narrative has a linchpin over the October 7th terrorist attack. And you can call it that, whatever have you. But I mean, to deny the context of which there's an abuse from the Israelis down to the Palestinians would also be a facetious thing to do. But then again, we are in a reality to which that you can't trust the media. There's a Kanye line, and it's so true. You know that it's fake if it's in the news. So true. And so anyway, we have a guy in Andrew Tate who says, you know what, Ben Shapiro, you have short man syndrome. You have little man syndrome. You want big, strong men such as myself. Andrew's like 6'3", 220 pounds. Okay, you're going to have big, strong men such as him fight these wars for you, when in reality, you ought to be doing it. You're calling for the blood, then go ahead and fucking fight it yourself. But instead, he wants all these random kids, these 18-year-olds to be drafted to go fight in Afghanistan, Iraq, all these different places. He wants to bomb Syria, Iran. Every place where there could be a war, he has wanted the war. You can't think of a single thing. I was somebody who grew up on Ben Shapiro in a major way. I'm somebody who, at as young as 8-10 years old, I was watching, well, not even watching, but on the radio, you go to sleep or something. Okay, well, he's in the background. Mark Levin's show, shit like this. Warmongering to the nth degree. These are these Jewish dual citizens. These people are saying that we ought to fight for Israel as Christians while they're Jews. And there's some sort of biblical reason as to why. But then again, they don't even believe in the same Bible. So why would they give a shit? Of course, they're fighting for their own interest. But even besides that, we have this person in Piers Morgan who's also defending Ben Shapiro. If you look at the sort of person, again, think of the optics and the phenotypical archetype of what Andrew Tate is saying. That sentence where he says, big strong men such as me, compared to manlets like Ben Shapiro, but also pans camera, and this is just ironic editing by the BBC, where they're like, oh, look at this. It's fucking Piers Morgan. This is your average Israel defender. The Palestinian defenders are these low IQ, in shape 25-year-old brown people. The fucking defenders of Israel tend to be 60-year-old, well-off, fat, toad-looking niggas, such as Piers Morgan. All right, let's play it.
And the reason he tweeted that and said that is because when Hamas and Israel, at the very early in the conflict, I think it was 3 days in, were discussing possible peace talks, he tweeted, no, absolutely not, fuck them, kill them all. And I said, Ben, as a man who's done his own fighting, because I've had a life of pain and violence, listen to me. Peace is always worth a conversation. What I said is that we should always be prepared to at least discuss peace. He, because he's a warmonger, said, no, peace is not worth the conversation. You're this, you're that, that. Because he's always sitting behind his desk. He must have a booster chair, and he's always running his mouth trying to invoke violence and call for war. And I find it kind of hypocritical because a man who's so small he would die if he was slapped on the street, sitting behind a desk and screaming for other people to be annihilated, I think is kind of, it's worse than hypocritical. It's insane.
I believe if he was sitting here listening to this, he would say,
Okay, well, that's a great point again. So, first of all, this is what charisma is. Charisma is being able to weave a narrative whilst also having the wit and the rhetorical acumen to just freebase fucking things that are funny. For instance, talking about a man like Ben. Okay, you tower over this guy by 6 inches. That gives you the right, by God, ostensibly, to say, okay, this nigga in his booster chair. Again, I couldn't see that because we're like the same height, me and Ben. But this guy, fucking Andrew Tate, can say it. And it's brilliant. Most people can come up with that. Again, the articulation is profoundly good for a guy who pimps niggas out on cam whore sites. He's really eloquent. And that's something that you can't say about most Tims like Tyrone, Pookie, and Ray Ray. These people cannot, Flava Flav. Anyway, those pimps are not even close to Andrew. Plus, on top of this, we have another point, right? So he sounds very reasonable. Again, Andrew's coming from the outside point of view. He's the guy who's censored. Ben Shapiro is basically the most mainstream conservative voice in the planet. He has worked out deals with all of these YouTube platformers so that they can stay monetized. They have big financial backing, whatever have you. I mean, if you watch a Ben Shapiro show, there's like fucking ads every 5 minutes, okay? But he says them really fast, folks. ExpressVPN, Noble Gold, folks. Birch Gold, please. Okay. All right, folks. Back to your programming. Israel, love Israel. Okay, that's my Ben impression. Now we're back. So yeah, Andrew says, look, he won't even argue for peace. You can't even argue a ceasefire. Ben is the radical, and that is actually true. When you zoom it out, when you take away the confines of the narrative now, it seems like the Israeli side is really unreasonable. And it's not just the Israeli side. It is more so the neoconservative, AIPAC-backed Netanyahu. These people are the types that are just like saying no ceasefire, no peace. And it's like anybody who's not that invested either way would be like, okay, well, war's bad. How about we just shut it the fuck down? No, they say, no, we got to finish them off. Okay, well, I don't know about that. It's like the Godfather. Oh, you sleep with the fishes. It's like, well, maybe you shouldn't push all these Arabs into the Mediterranean. Most of them can't swim, I assume. Like, okay, what are you going to do with these people? And anyway, let's keep going.
Say that what he's screaming for is for Jewish people in Israel to be able to defend themselves.
And
he's a Jewish
Ben
man.
does is call for war. And I agree. Defending yourself.
That's not all he does.
That's all he does. And calling for war and defending.
Again, confidence. Again, so body language. He doesn't always call for war. Yes, he does. Flippantly, confidently. And again, he gets away with a lot of it because he wears sunglasses, so you can't tell if he's holding eye contact or not when he talks. And a lot of that's because he has ugly eyes. Not so much that he has like an eye problem, like a lazy eye, but just that he's not good looking. But I mean, I could get away with this, right? Where you go, yes, warmonger all the time. True, real. You don't have to follow Ben Shapiro. That's just the vibe. Okay. Could there be one niche scenario where he's like, okay, this war in Somalia we shouldn't do? Maybe. But as of the last 10 years, every single chance for a missile strike or whatnot. In fact, any people that have been following politics like I have would know that in 2018 and 17, when Trump bombed Syria under Assad, he was sucking Trump's dick for like weeks straight. Any other time, he didn't give a fuck. But oh my God, this is actually great. I love this. For Raytheon, oh my God, we just bombed Israel. What do you call it? Assad, Syria. Okay, let's keep going.
Defending yourself is very different than genocide. And Ben, like I said, overall, most of Ben's worldviews and mine probably align. We don't align on the religious sect, we don't rely on the religious points, fine. But our overall worldviews about how society should function probably align on many of the key issues. I don't have a beef with Ben, and I don't watch his show, and I have no idea what he talks about a lot of the time. But what I do know is every time I turn it on, he's calling for someone else's son to go and die in a ditch somewhere for his interests. And I don't like people who are not advocates for peace. Blessed.
Now, think about that. If you watch the 2004 Democratic primary debates, they were anti-Iraq war for the most part, or at least trepidatious insofar as it was in the zeitgeist, okay? So, I mean, if you follow politics from 20 years ago, I assume you haven't, but basically, that was the context. So, this is a very leftist sort of logic from, of course, Andrew Tate. But the point is that it's a very rhetorically effective tool to say, dying in a trench from some faraway country, your son, your daughter, whatever have you will die. Now, that's a very facetious way of arguing it. Because if you had a very justified war, there would still be a ton of 18-year-olds dying, okay? And it'd be a very sad thing to watch for a lot of people. Maybe not me, I'm desensitized. But, everybody else would be seething at the thought. Which is to say, that's a rhetorically effective tool. Now, is it facetious? Of course. Because if there were a justified war, you'd be like, okay, well, send these teenagers to die. But, I mean, I think it's funny.
Are the peacemakers, said Candace, who's far more intelligent than Ben will ever be. And she is completely right. He replied, that rhetoric, starting an argument with me when I said we should talk about peace. I say we should talk about peace. He calls for the death of civilians, and somehow we're asking why my point of view is seen as abstract. It's insane. Why can't we all just sit down and say the fighting must end? Why can't we do that? Why can't we sit and say, nobody should be dying, let's stop using the most advanced military weaponry on the planet to blow the limbs off.
Pierce is pursing his lips. He's like, he's seething. There's no argument. Again, Andrew's the reasonable guy. He's saying, hey, manlet behind your computer. How about you fight these wars you support, bitch? How about you justify a war instead of demanding everybody else? How come you're a Jewish nigga in America telling us to fund some other country? I mean, this is just common sense. Any construction worker could be like, oh, actually, this fucking mulatto is right. And you know what? It's a great point. And Pierce, who's literally paid millions, I think, if not to support these sort of things, at least is believing in these things. In a similar vein to Bill Maher, these like centrist fucking blowhards that can be right sometimes. These people, they get paid basically to support and toe the party line. And these niggas still cannot come up with the defense. This guy's like 30 years older than Andrew and can't even come up with something cognizant or articulate to respond, or at least he hasn't yet.
Children. Why can't we say that without being deemed some kind of terrorist sympathizer or anti-Semite? It's insanity. Trump came along and didn't start a single war. He's the only one who didn't. And they're going to come along him and make him a bad guy when a new president comes in. It's just endless war and death and killing. Have you seen a dead body, Piers? Have you seen people lose a fucking limb? It's disgusting. I know what's happening over there.
Have you seen that?
I don't need to tell you about the parts of my history that I'm not prepared to share, Piers.
Okay, he tripped a little bit. Also, by the way, great freeze frame on Piers Morgan. I mean, this is exactly why his sort of political point of view is completely resonating with the phenotype. I mean, it's just like, what the fuck? He looks like a pig. And you know what? There's a lot of people like this where, you know, if they wear makeup on the studio and you're watching your TV from the living room and it's like 20 feet away and they're wearing a suit, you might think, wow, this guy's not like 50 pounds overweight and like fat as fuck. But I mean, just look at this fucking freeze frame. I mean, there's no angle where you'd get me looking like that. Like, That's him, bro. This is your average Israel, like, blind believer. There's some arguments, like, granted, I'm not pro-Israel, but I also just don't give a shit either way. But you're never going to catch me dead defending a country this fucking harsh. Even America is like, you have to support us bombing civilians. Bro, what? Ridiculous. Anyway, with Andrew Tate. Now, he was stumbled. So, rhetorically, again, killing Pierce. Pierce completely non-committal emotionally because he's losing. Whereas Andrew was in his bag saying like, oh, you don't want to see limbs being blown the fuck off and all this. You don't want to see a dead body. Now, Pierce says, wait, you've seen a dead body? And then Andrew stutters, which is crazy. He probably hasn't seen a dead body.
I said it to Ben. I said people who have done their own fighting and seen their own violence and have seen people bleed out in the street from a stab wound are not going to be so smart and so quick to sit behind a desk and call for the death of innocent people. It's disgusting what's happening. I don't want anyone to die on either side. And when I come along as a peacemaker and say this is insane, because he's a warmonger, because he has chosen blinkers and sees one side of the argument and refuses to accept the humanity of Palestinians, he says I'm a bad person for calling for peace.
Well, you know why? Because he'll probably listen to this interview and say, this guy can't even describe Hamas as terrorists.
If Ben Shapiro thinks bad of
and if you don't think what happened to the people in Israel on October the 7th is an act of terrorism,
did I not just say
then you are,
I want all people
then
to
you are
stop
just
dying?
You are just as partisan to one side as you believe Ben Shapiro
Did
is
I
to the
not
other.
just say I want all people?
Okay, now that is fucking ridiculous on a multivariate set of factors here, because think about it, folks. Today we're discussing a situation in which Pierce is saying you are just as partisan towards Hamas as fucking Ben is to Israel because you won't call what they did so-and-so. I mean, yeah, are the people that are defending the Palestinians facetious as to what happened on October 7th? Yes, but I mean, if you're looking at a divorce and you have the wife being a complete bitch, and then you have the husband who one time hits the wife, that's inexcusable. But I mean, in totality, the husband's still probably in the right, if in the right circumstance. So you might sweep it up and say he didn't hit her, and you are lying. But I mean, it's for the greater good. Now, again, both hands are bloody. One's covered in mud. One's covered in gold and birch subsidies. Okay, great. But I mean, the point is, obviously, is that Andrew Tate is sweeping it up for an appropriate reason, grandstanding and all included. Okay, fine. Whereas with Ben Shapiro, they're using the linchpin of October 7th as a moral rationalization for everything they're doing, including the deaths of thousands of Palestinian civilians, which I personally don't even care about. But I mean, just on paper is fucked up. And what's more better than that, of course, folks, is that we have a situation in here where Palestine, or I guess Israel in this case, will bomb civilians and then use the linchpin of October 7th as some sort of thing. Now, here's the catch. How does the fuck do these people have billions of dollars to spend in a year, coming from us in a major part, the United States, where they have an Iron Dome system, where they have Raytheon missiles defending them, Patriot systems, anti-missile systems. Okay. But if you look at the fucking videos, you have people, niggas coming off the battle bus, basically, the battle short bus, these Palestinian warriors jumping off in parachutes, and they're not stopped. How is that even possible? And you could say, well, the IDF and the Mossad are like the best. They're better than the CIA pound for pound, and that's true. Okay, how did they not know this attack was happening? It's very convenient. It's like Pearl Harbor, where there's an argument to be made that these people willfully just kind of ignored the attack so that they would have a political acumen and casus belli to then inflict a way bigger problem onto the other side. Now, that is somewhat of a conspiracy. I haven't looked into it, but that's sort of what Andrew is hinting at.
People to start dying. Stop dying. Piers, don't interrupt this. It's 2 sentences. I want all people to stop dying. However, I understand what is going to happen when you create a pressure cooker. That is my answer, and it's extremely professional. I don't want anyone to die, and because I don't want anyone to die, because I'm a peacemaker, because I'm a humanist, I understand you cannot lock people in an open-air prison for an undetermined period of time without provoking terrorism.
So out of interest, what would you have done if you'd been Israel after October the 7th?
That's a really interesting question, and I think there's people who are more qualified than me to answer.
Given that Hamas last
Okay, so that is basically the Ben Shapiro segment where he roasts Shapiro. This was brilliant for a myriad of reasons, chief among them being, of course, that Andrew Tate is somebody who, again, doesn't have a moral leg to stand on generally, like perverted, hustler university. Okay, so some scummy things, of course. But here's the thing. He speaks with confidence that Ben Shapiro doesn't have. And, there's 2 levels of articulation. There is the one where you can talk fast and you can say the right words. But then there's charisma. And that's what Andrew Tate has. And realistically, of course, Andrew Tate is somebody who, in a major way, is flawed but also talented. And that talent is what carries the argument. Okay. So also with the Israel thing, of course, Ben Shapiro has a dual allegiance. And it is so fucking obvious. I mean, you can look at the top of his head. I mean, you could just say it. Whereas with me, it's like if I were to say Mexico's in the right, but I don't have any sort of like particular interest in it, even though I'm from there. Okay. I mean, that's just fucking duplicitous as hell. And so from that alone, you can just tell that Ben Shapiro is arguing in bad faith, and it's a Talmudic faith, and it's one where it most likely doesn't have a Protestant Christian's best, interest in mind. Okay. So you could support Israel and just say, okay, well, it's objectively in the right. But to say like we owe them something is fucking ridiculous because from my point of view, we don't. And with the Palestinians, are they dumb? Yeah. But can you expect how they would react because they don't have another recourse, because they don't have a stable economy, because they don't have stable democracy, because they don't have access to land, because they don't have human rights? Maybe then you could argue, you know what? Their barbaric terrorism in the great scheme of things is not a big deal. Big a deal, as in like you can expect it. Now, can you endorse it? No. But can you see how it happened? For sure. It is what it is. It's like if you abuse a kid enough, they might hit you. They might kill you. Don't act surprised. Not okay, but also don't act surprised. Bottom line, Ben Shapiro got absolutely destroyed and felt it, roasted by Andrew Tate. See you in the next video. Adios.